Um,
Yeah, this is actually a scene from Madagascar.
nice.
One day you'll go to it. It's an amazing place.
I really hope so. Get out of here.
Okay, so you're working on the National History Day project?
Yes, sir. And the theme is communications in history. And our first thought was the internet. And when the internet was created, because it's like the biggest communication in history. And the more we searched it, ARPANET came up, and then your name came up. So we really thought it'd be cool to interview you about it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Okay. So our first question is, what does packet switching have to do with the internet and how it works? Because we know you invented the mathematical theory behind packet switching.
So
And
there's a bigger principle behind all of this. The voice network, which is the big AT&T voice network, which existed at the time, carried voice. And voice is a particular kind of communication stream. It's fairly continuous. When you and I talk on a telephone handset, basically there's a link from me to you through the network, a whole sequence of channels, and they're dedicated to our conversation. But if I pause and take a cup of coffee and stop speaking, those links are still dedicated to our conversation and they're being wasted. Now, with voice, you spend about a third of the time silent between both parties, and that's acceptable. But when you talk about having computers talking to each other, they're what's called very bursty, which means they burst out some data and then they're quiet for a while and they burst it out again. A good example, when you're at a keyboard, you go click, 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 click. But each click creates a burst of data, which goes very quickly through the network, and then it's quiet for a long time till you hit the next key. In fact, if you look at data streams, they're silent up to 99 or more percent of the time. So you can't afford to use a dedicated circuit for bursty data traffic. Instead, you want to do something which allows them to be dynamically allocated, which means that a link is not devoted to our session, but it only becomes ours when we present data to it, and then it forwards it, and then it lets go and lets somebody else use it. And that's called sharing of resources. In this case, communication links, expensive communication links. And it's done dynamically. So I call this dynamic resource sharing. Again, you don't have a dedicated link. It's only there to serve what happens to be ready to use it. Now, one way to implement that is with packet switching. There are many other ways. I'll explain packet switching in a moment, but another way is message switching. Suppose I want to send a short file, maybe a chat session, this much data. It goes through the network intact, but it only gets assigned to a link when it arrives through the network at a particular location, a particular node. That also is dynamic resource sharing. It's not assigned, it's used dynamically. Another way is polling. I ask you, do you have something to send? You say no. Oh, there's somebody else. You got something? Yes. Okay, you can use me. That's another way. There are many ways. And another one is packet switching. Now, packet switching takes a block of data and breaks it up into fixed length packets. And each packet goes off into the network on its own. It's as if you wrote a letter on a bunch of individual postcards. And each postcard gets mailed separately through the network. At the other end, the postman puts all the postcards together and gives you a big letter. Now, I can go into some reasons why packet switching has some advantages and some disadvantages, but that was the technology that I looked at, with the bigger principle being this dynamic resource sharing, and it was adopted for the ARPANET. One side comment again, you're probably getting too much information, but I'll give it to you anyway.
no, thank you.
The, the kind of mathematics you need in order to understand how these funny things running around a network suddenly reach a channel and say, I want to be transmitted over you. Well, more than one may arrive at the same time. So they get in a queue of some sort. You go, then Sarah goes, then I go, etc. Well, queuing theory is a wonderful mathematical theory which allows you to talk about things like throughput, response time, efficiency, size of buffers, etc. Those are exactly the metrics you want when you want to evaluate a data network. How much traffic is it handling? How fast is the traffic going through, etc. And so queuing theory is a tool I used to analyze these random arrivals of bunches of data that need to go through. Long answer. Packet switching is one implementation of this principle.
Thank you. So, from my understanding, you were there the day that the first message was sent from UCLA to Stanford.
That's correct. Stanford Research Institute. It wasn't the
Okay.
university, by the way. People make that mistake.
Okay.
Okay.
So, could you describe your experience the day that everything went down?
Okay. It was not a big deal.
No.
First of all, when ARPA decided they needed a network, they put together a group. We wrote a specification. Specification went out to industry to implement this specification. And the contract was run by a company in Cambridge, Massachusetts called Bolt, Beranek and Newman. I'm really answering your question, don't worry.
Yeah.
And they took the spec of what we meant by packet switching and routing and such like, and they implemented it into a state-of-the-art mini computer at the time. I don't know if you've seen a picture, you may have if you looked at the ARPANET. It's a thing the size of a refrigerator.
Yeah, I have it like in my research.
Yeah, it's big. It's anyway.
Yeah.
That was the first router. Right
Yeah.
now, there's more capability in my watch, and this is a very old scientific calculator watch than was in that machine. But so that machine, and it was decided that UCLA would be the first node on the network. Why? Because I and my team had the expertise to understand how it should perform, make models of it, measure it, experiment with it, and then try to fix any faults we found. So we were called the Network Measurement Center. So the first switch, the switch is called an Interface Message Processor, IMP, IMP. The first IMP arrived at UCLA on the Labor Day weekend of 1969. And on the Tuesday following the Monday of Labor Day, on September 2nd, we connected that IMP, that router, to our host computer sitting in the same computer room. That was somewhat of a bigger event because everybody came to see if that would work. Could we send bits from this new thing called a router to a computer? Well, who was there? Well, AT&T was there. We were using their long haul lines. UCLA University was there. My department was there. ARPA was there. They were supporting this thing. The manufacturers of the mini computer, Honeywell, were there. The company in Cambridge, Mass was there. We had the local lines, GTE there. Everybody was there to point the finger to the other guy if it didn't work. Well, we connected it and the bits worked. That was more of a, what should I say, an event where people came to see it. But it was one node, and one node does not a network make. You know, just a machine talking to another machine in a single room. The idea of the ARPANET was to allow you, in your location in Maryland, are you?
Mississippi.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mississippi.
Yeah.
It's probably a computer in your school. The idea was that you could log on to your high school machine and then use the network to log on to my machine at UCLA and use the resources at my machine because it had special capability. The idea of this network was sit at a local machine, log through the network to a remote machine, and use the resources of that machine. Why? Because this research community that ARPA was supporting created wonderful capabilities at many different sites around the country. And we wanted to give access to all those sites, to all the researchers. What do we need? A network. And that's why the ARPANET was created. Now, getting back to your question. On October 29th, 1969, we finally had two nodes in the network, one at UCLA and the other one, as you said, at Stanford Research Institute, 350 miles to the north, and a high-speed line connecting the two. So we had my host computer, its router, a high-speed line to a router at SRI to their host computer. We had a full 2-node network. We can now test the functionality. Can I log on from UCLA to SRI and use the machine there? So this was, as you point out, a much more monumental event, but nobody was there. We didn't have a camera. We didn't have a voice recorder. We only had a small entry in the log, which you may have seen, which recorded the event. So who was there? One of my software programs, he was a graduate student. Charlie Klein was his name. And there was a programmer up at SRI named Bill Duval. And we decided, let's try this out. Let's see if we make a login from UCLA to SRI. There was no press, no camera, no anything there. Now, in order to do that, you'd think we'd want to send a message. I mean, look at what Alexander Graham Bell did. First telephone message, come here, Watson, I need you. How about Samuel Morse, the first telegraph message? Do you know what that was?
No, sir.
It was, what hath God wrought? It was a biblical statement with some power. What hath God wrought? What about Armstrong? A giant leap for mankind. These guys were smart. They understood the public relations and the media and the press, and they had good messages ready. We didn't have one. All we wanted to do was log in. You know, a bunch of nerds doing their job at night, 10:30 at night. So we had, and in order to make sure this was working, we set up a telephone connection between Charlie and Bill so they could talk about what was happening. This is a new technology, packet switching. What the heck is that? Is anything happening? So they had this phone, and Charlie typed the L, and the remote, and he asked Bill, "Do you get the L?" And Bill said, "Yep, got the L." Type the O, you get the O? Yep, got the O. Type the G, you get the G, crash. Now, what's interesting is that in order for us to log in, all we had to do was type LOG, and that remote machine is smart enough to know what we're doing. It'll type the IN for us. Well, we couldn't even get that far. So what was the first message ever on the internet? Lo, as in, lo and behold. Now, we couldn't have asked for a better, more powerful, more succinct, more prophetic message than lo. Lo and behold, I added later. And then we went to bed, okay? We got what we wanted. Oh, by the way, we fixed it in a few minutes. We found out what the trouble was. By the way, what crashed? It wasn't our host computer. It wasn't our router. It wasn't the high-speed line. It wasn't the router at SRI. It was the SRI computer that crashed for good reason. I can explain if you want, but we fixed it. So let me ask you a question. How many revolutions do you know where you can tell the exact minute when the revolution began and the exact 4 square feet where it started? I mean, like the Industrial Revolution, where did that begin?
We learned it last year. Do you remember?
French Revolution.
Oh my gosh. Was it 1789 to 1799?
Well, can you specify exactly where and exactly when? There's not too many you can. They're hard to do.
Yeah.
Even the American Revolution, you know, in Charleston Bay. Well, with the internet, we can. It happened in my lab, room 3420 Belter Hall in our computer science department at 10:30 at night on October 29th, 1969. And the 4 square, you have a picture of the imp. Is it shown in the room where it began? Because that imp sits now in the same 4 square feet where it did back then when it started. So you can come to my center and see that exact location where it started. And now we know the exact time. So it's a kind of holy place, if you will. And you can take a tour, by the way. When this is over, I'll send you a link. You can take a virtual tour of that room. You can see me talking about all these things. Okay. Long answer to a short question.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the more I Googled, there were several explanations for why ARPANET was created. Some said it was for like the military, and some say it was for the public, and some for the government in general. But do you know the real reason?
Yes, I do. And you're exactly right. That's a very controversial question. Again, you're not going to get an immediately direct answer. I have to go back a little bit.
Yeah.
October 1957, the Russians launched Sputnik. I don't know if you've heard of Sputnik. It was the first satellite to be launched into space, circling the Earth. And it was sending a message to Earth. It kept going beep, 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 as it circled the Earth. And it drove America crazy because the Russians had gotten to space before we did. It was a great disgrace. President Eisenhower, who was president then, said, "We've been caught with our pants down. We are no longer number one in technology." So he vowed that would never happen again. And he created the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, within the Department of Defense to support STEM technology, science, technology, engineering, and math, to bring the capability of the United States back up to number one. And what did they do? They supported research labs, they supported industrial research centers, education, etc. And that started in February of 1958. So they started funding really good research around the country. And by the time 1962 came around, they added to that computer funding, computer research in various laboratories at universities, etc. By the time, and by the way, this is only to bring up the capability of the American youth and engineers. No military application insinuated. By 1966, there were so many good research centers around, as I mentioned before, with really good capabilities in their computers, they wanted to connect them together so everybody could share. So they decided to make the ARPANET. Now, getting to the motivation, why? To allow researchers to share their research with and by others around the community, not to help launch a missile, not to create a defense system, simply pure, unadulterated research. And by the way, the ARPA funding was an enormously, what should I say, open and encouraging funding culture. I'll explain it in a minute. But what happened is that there was no requirement that what we were doing, our research, would have any military application at all. That myth comes from the fact that there was some work taking place at RAND Corporation, specifically to protect the United States against an enemy attack, and to try to talk about where networks should be designed to withstand their attack. But our research was simply pure academic research. And by 1969, when we launched, there was still no requirement. It was meant to connect researchers together. Now, a caveat. I was one of those receiving money. By the way, let me tell you about that culture, because that's another, you can make a good point about that, I think. The way ARPA gave money to researchers like myself was the following. They'd come to a great researcher, say Marvin Minsky, he's one of the founders of artificial intelligence at MIT. They go to say, "Marvin, you're a great researcher. Here's a pile of money. Go do something really special and wonderful and out of reach. Shoot high, high risk, high payoff. You're going to have the money for a long time. No holds barred. We're not going to watch what you're doing. Failure's okay. Just keep going. Do something significant." And they went to a bunch of researchers around the country and did this. Now, what does a researcher like myself do with money when the government gives it to me? I'm a professor. I use it to fund graduate students. Now, how do we do that? We go to the graduates and say, "Look, student so-and-so, here's a problem. Go solve it. Go make a protocol. Go make a high-speed network. Go make a wireless thing. We're not going to bother you. Figure it out yourself. Organize yourself among the graduate students in a little network of your own group. And if you want help, we'll help you." The point is this was and failure's okay. Shoot high. We'll have it for a long time. What better environment to basically create an innovative atmosphere of wonderful results? And what came out of that period, that golden era? Not only networking, but time sharing, graphics, artificial intelligence, high performance computing, on and on and on. Chip technology, all of that came out of that wonderful funding. So I'm finally going to get to your essential answer again. Sorry, it's just too long-winded. We, principal investigators, the faculty, and the students, no military pressure at all, does not have to have a military application. Do what you want to make it good. Now, above that, we were communicating with the people at ARPA through things called program managers at ARPA, and they were basically the interface. And above them was the director of the computer group within ARPA. And above those directors was the overall director of ARPA. And he reported to the Department of Defense. Now you have to believe that somewhere going up that hierarchy, someone was saying, look, guys, we're spending millions of dollars. Let's look for military applications of this work that's bubbling up from below. Now there is some evidence that was going on from some of the ARPA directors, but the important thing is at the research level, all the action was taking place, no such pressure.
Oh, thank you so much for that answer. So I know that you went to MIT because you're obviously like really smart. So we want to see where you went to school. We saw you went to MIT. And I just want to know if any of your experiences there motivated you to do what you did at UCLA.
Well, of course, the answer is yes. MIT was a wonderful place. And when I was there, it was, again, a kind of a golden era. There were unbelievable faculty and graduate students there. And let me talk a little more about the environment. My undergraduate degree was at CCNY, and the tuition was $12 a semester. It was actually just a filing fee. And I couldn't afford it. I had to make money to bring into my parents' household to help support the family. So I went to night school. Now, who goes to night school to get an electrical engineering degree? Crazies. Poor, motivated kids, dropouts, and GIs coming back from World War II, highly motivated. What did I do during the day? I was an assistant engineer in an industrial electronics firm, working with the same kind of graduate engineers, GIs who came back. So I was in an environment where people were highly motivated to succeed, else you fail and you lose big time. When I got to MIT on a full scholarship, of course, I had that same driving attitude, as did many of my classmates. They didn't come up that path. Some of them were more privileged, but everybody was smart as hell, independent, and very collaborative. And I went to MIT on a scholarship just to get a master's degree. And by the way, I got married while I was an undergraduate. I don't recommend that. And when I finished my master's degree under this wonderful scholarship program, I already had a child on the way, and I was ready to take a research position at MIT. And my thesis supervisor, my master's thesis supervisor said, look, Len, you got to get a PhD. I said, I don't want a PhD. I got a child on the way. I need a full-time job doing research. It's a great position here. They say, you got to get it. So I said, look, if I'm going to do that, if I'm going to invest 3 or 4 years of my life, I have 2 conditions. Condition number 1, I want to work for the best professor I can find at MIT. And number 2, I want to do something which will have impact, not just some small thing which will disappear in 3 weeks when I'm done with it. So happily at MIT, there was this wonderful professor named Claude Shannon. If you've never heard of his name, you should look him up. He's responsible for much of the digital electronics and information systems we have today. So I started working for him and many of his graduate students. And the environment there was one of seeking knowledge, finding new results, exchanging ideas, and a wonderfully collaborative and brilliant group of researchers and faculty. So that answers your question. It was a place, a golden era, where enormous results were happening, enormous new researchers were popping out with great people and brilliant students. And the fact, though, is that many of those students were working on extensions of what Claude Shannon had done for his great work. And the area was information theory. And I looked at what they were doing and I said, look, the problems they're working on, Shannon did the great work. Those students were working on small leftover problems, which would not have much impact and which were really hard problems. I said, that's not what I signed up for. Meanwhile, I was surrounded by computers at MIT, and I realized that sooner or later, those computers would have to talk to each other. And I realized there was no adequate technology to allow them to do so, as I explained earlier. The telephone network using something called circuit switching was inadequate. So I decided, look, here's a new problem nobody's been looking at. It's going to have impact if I solve it. And I had an approach to how to solve it. So that motivated me to move into a new area, which nobody was looking at, with great resources and a challenging problem. So yes, MIT was very important in allowing me to reach well beyond my grasp and try to achieve something which would be demanding, but would have impact. And too many students settle for something less, something they can understand exactly. They realize how to approach it clearly, and it's well contained, and it gets done. But it doesn't mean that's where the gratification and the payoff comes. You have to reach beyond your grasp and have confidence that you can make success out of it.
Yes, sir. When you made the discoveries that you did at that time, did you realize how big an impact you would have on history?
No.
No.
So you have to understand, as a student, I handed in my PhD dissertation in December of 1962. Nobody cared. I went to AT&T, the company that was running the telephone network, and I said, look, you guys should build a data network in addition to your voice network. And they said it wouldn't work. And they said, even if it does work, we want nothing to do with it. Little boy, go away. So eventually, me and my colleagues created a network which basically destroyed their network. It ate their lunch, if you will. So nobody was interested until the Sputnik story led to ARPA wanting a network, and I was now at UCLA. Now is a chance to basically implement my theory and prove it in the field. So initially, nobody cared.
Really?
And by the way, in addition, when we started the network, those early days, 1 node, 2 node, 3, 4 node, et cetera, none of the sites, none of the locations wanted to join the network. For example, Illinois didn't want to join, University of Illinois. And why not? We're saying, look, Illinois, put your computer on this network so other people can share their resources, share your resources. They said, what, are you crazy? This computer is being used 100% of the time by my students and faculty. I can't let the outside world access. And we said, but look, you'll be able to use other people's resources, unique resources. They said, no, you can't have it. Until ARPA stepped in and said, look, Illinois, and many other sites, we're funding you. You will join the network. And so they were forced to join, and very soon they were thrilled to be able to gain all these resources. But again, there was roadblocks all along the way.
That's really amazing. Is there anything else you can tell me about ARPANET? Any other details you'd like to share?
Well, I think an important point was not only the technology, which was exciting and challenging, but the culture I started to describe where people were given flexibility and freedom, created a broader culture where collaboratively all of us felt this was an environment that was ethical, it was open, it was shared, it was trusted, it was free and unbounded. We were all friends. I knew everybody on the early ARPANET. We all behaved well. There was no malicious behavior, no exploitation, no profit motive, nothing was patented. The gratification we got was by making an engineering success out of it and having other people recognize, yes, what you did was really nice, I want to use it. And there's a consequence to that environment, though. It was flexible and wonderful, produced wonderful results, but it also meant we didn't carefully watch out for the potential of malicious behavior. We didn't put any protective mechanisms. We basically ignored security and privacy because it was a friendly environment. 25 years later, it came back to bite us big time. And you, the youth of your generation, are suffering the consequences of the lack of proper security and privacy and controls on the network. We could have done something about it, but we didn't because the threat was not there. It was short-sighted. It was such a wonderful, vigorous environment at the time. And we just enjoyed making the system happen and not trying to exploit it or patent it or anything else. Now that the consumer world is connected and the corporations and the big systems recognize this is not a network for reaching out for information. This is a shopping machine. It's a money-making machine. It's a gossip chamber. It's an entertainment channel. And so the profit motive has come in and it's severely crippled and corrupted much of what goes on the internet. But that's another story.
Is there any advice you give us going forth in our project?
Yes, I think you can describe the technology stuff we talked about and some of the history. Please well, I recommend you bring in the idea of the environment and the culture and the motivations and what drove us to do what we did. You know, in some sense, we had a very easy job. There was no legacy system to which we had to be compatible. It was a clean slate. You can't do that today. Whatever you add to the internet today has to be compatible with what's there now, namely billions of users and billions of machines. So it makes it much harder. But the culture was a really important driver to create such a wonderful technology. The other thing I want to say is this. You're talking to me because you think I had a lot to do with creating the ARPANET and the internet. Sure. And there's a bunch of other people. You can list, you know, dozens of critical people. My point is, if none of us had been born, you would still have an internet today. It was going to happen. It was in the air. And I'll prove that to you by the following. There's a quote I like to recite, and I'll paraphrase it. It says the following. It was said by a gentleman at some point. He said, "It will be possible for a businessman in New York to reach out using a device no larger than a watch and communicate with his colleague in London easily, immediately, at almost no cost, and send any picture, drawing, text, voice, anything you like, immediately, anywhere in the world." Now, if you think about what that person was saying, he was describing the internet that we have today. It was an early vision of what the internet could be, of what this thing could be. That was quoted in 1908 by Nikola Tesla. He had this vision of what we have today. And on the way, others had similar visions. H.G. Wells, Vannevar Bush, Licklider. I had a vision early on before it happened. It was going to happen. It didn't require any specific individuals. And that's a point you may want to make. It was in the air. That vision just had to wait for the technology to catch up with it. And once technology could match the vision, poof, here we are. And that's an important message, I think, for the youth of today to realize they have a lot to contribute. There's plenty of open space in this world of technology to basically contribute, add your own ideas, add new applications, etc.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us. It means more than you know. It really does.
Listen, if we don't invest in our youth, what are we here for? I mean, so good luck, and I'm happy to work with you.
Thank you so much.
Take care now.
Bye. You too.
Stay safe.